This episode is brought to you by plant breeder KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
The forecast is for no meaningful rain in the next month. I can't honestly see there's a great argument for wasting resources of diesel, metal, time, seed if there's no prospect of it growing. So it does seem a bit ridiculous to me that people would be forced down an avenue where they had to plant the seed with no hope of it doing any good.
Defra announces a £65 million package for drought-hit farmers. Will it make a difference? With no moisture in the ground, when should you be drilling new season crops, and what's the outlook for ruminant livestock and forage this winter? We visit firefighting farmers in South Wales and three old men in boats who are raising money for farming and mental health in East Anglia. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johan Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
A bumper episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast this week as Defra unveils a £65 million package for drought-hit farmers in England. The package includes the partial relaxation of agri-environment rules, including for the Sustainable Farming Incentive, or SFI. Farmers who are paid to look after wildlife habitat on parts of their land are normally barred from grazing or cutting it until later in the year, but the changes will allow drought-hit farmers to graze that land without losing the payments, so long as they don't damage the soil. Now, we're going to unpack that £65 million Defra package in just a moment. But first, here's independent farm consultant Ian Gould, who's been calling for a flexible approach to the SFI, including when it comes to cover crops.
I'm in Cambridgeshire, and the forecast here is for no meaningful rain in the next month. I can't honestly see that there's a great argument for wasting resources of diesel, metal, time, seed, everything else if there's no prospect of it growing, and also that there's no time between when that will need to be planted and have a chance to grow and do the job it's there for, and the necessity to get the next crop in the ground. So normally with an early harvest, it's a fantastic opportunity because you've got a nice long window of 8 to 10 weeks where these can do an amazing job on soil structuring and so on. But without any real ability to grow, and it is no ability to grow under the current conditions, it does seem a bit ridiculous to me that people would be forced down an avenue where they had to plant the seed with no hope of it doing any good, simply to hopefully get paid.
And Ian, this is unprecedented. Have you ever seen a situation like this before?
Not in my working lifetime, no. I am old enough to remember 1976, and when they had the Cobra meeting at Whitehall yesterday, I was really hoping that they did what they did in 1976, which was announce a Minister for Drought, because they announced Dennis Howell was the Minister for Drought, and it immediately started raining and didn't stop. But no, it is dreadful. It's really, really difficult. And my advice to most people at the moment would be just sit on your hands, because you'll just be spending money, and I'm not sure you're going to be moving the business forward by doing that.
So, Ian, what sort of approach do you think Defra should be taking?
I would very much hope that, I've worked with Defra and Natural England for a lot of years now, and they're not fundamentally bad people. They're pretty sensible most of the time. They have some difficult decisions to make at times, and I don't always agree with the ones they do make, but generally where things have been this difficult, they've been pretty fair with people. And if you've made a fair effort to get stuff done and the conditions have turned against you in the way they have so significantly this year, in the past, they've been pretty fair with people, in my opinion. And I would hope that will be the same again.
And fairness, Ian, works both ways. There's going to be a responsibility here for farmers to take this Defra announcement and these concessions in good faith.
Yeah, what underpins flexibility is, on the other side of it, farmers treating that flexibility with the respect it deserves. So we ask for flexibility, and then quite often people ride a coach and horses through what was intended just to make short-term gains. And actually, it's times like this when we need the trust of the organisations like Defra to believe that the flexibility is there, so that when, for example, flexibility around the rotation, your whole scheme might have been based on what your rotation was intended to be like. And an oilseed rape planting this autumn would be a good example of that, and maybe you've chosen to drive companion crops or whatever. But the chances of people putting oilseed rape in the ground in East Anglia at the moment looks pretty slim, doesn't it? So that will change the whole rotation. And it might be that, given the budgetary limitations and the absolute rush that there's going to be whenever this window opens, that they'll commit themselves to doing something that their rotation no longer allows them to do. So, that flexibility and the ability to amend agreement and fix errors, not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the situation had to change. We don't operate in a factory. We operate outside, and everyone's talking about how these issues are going to get worse over time. So flexibility is absolutely key. But I would go back to making sure that flexibility is used wisely and intelligently by the farming community as well, because we need to deliver value for money for what's being paid for.
Ian, thank you for talking to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. That's independent consultant Ian Gould on the challenges of farming in extreme heat and extreme drought, and the need for flexibility on all sides. Louise, we said we'd have a full report when Defra announced its response to the drought and to what is now the fifth heat wave this summer. Well, here it is, a £65 million package. Let's unpack it. Now, the package includes more flexibility in environmental schemes so farmers affected by drought can continue to receive payments and take practical steps to protect livestock, crops and land. It includes an extra £50 million for the Sustainable Farming Incentive 2026. Defra says that will help more farmers access support. It includes action to make it easier to build reservoirs, so that's a longer term strategy, up to £15 million for on-farm reservoirs. And it includes improved access to water during drought conditions, including Environment Agency support and simpler water access arrangements. That is what we know so far. Louise, what do you think?
Yeah, here it is. It's welcome. It's good news. I have to say, though, why did it take them so long? I think I used the expression, didn't I? Fiddling while Rome burns. And that really has seemed to us what it's been like. So, one of the biggest frustrations for me is because we have actually done this before. We've eased restrictions when we've been in drought situations. So it's not as though they've had to set a precedent or anything. But it is good news. They have allocated money to help farmers. It's a total of £65 million, isn't it? They're calling it a funding boost. And then that breaks down. So there's some of that money is going into the SFI, so extra money into that pot. Some of that money is going to support on-farm reservoirs. So various things that they've set out. As I said, it's good news. Farmers will be relieved and they'll be delighted. But as I said, it's a shame that it's taken this long before we've heard any news.
So 65 million then, and 50 million of that for the Sustainable Farming Incentive. That's leaving 15 million or up to 15 million for on-farm reservoirs, helping farmers store water and become, as Defra says, more resilient to future droughts. But 15 million doesn't actually buy you a lot of reservoirs.
Well, anyone who's already taken on the task of building an on-farm reservoir will know how expensive they are. And I mean, there are some sort of ballpark figures that are bandied about. Look, anything that makes it easier to build small reservoirs on farm is a good thing. Is this enough money? Well, no, it isn't. It definitely isn't. When you're looking at, I don't know, £5 per cubic metre of water, that's the sort of cost. And then, of course, you've got to also pay for the supporting infrastructure around a reservoir, so the pumps and the pipes and all that. So it's not a lot of money. However, it will be welcomed, and the reservoirs thing is a good thing. There are already a few, again, small reservoirs in train. People are getting on with them and getting them built. So it's a very good future-proofing measure, one that farms can do. They are going to have to make changes to the planning framework for this. So that's something that we need to wait for a bit more information on. And I think that's going to be forthcoming early next week. The other thing about reservoirs, which of course I've got to mention, is it's not just about having the storage capacity there. It's also about abstraction and being able to fill them up with water. So that's a bit that we haven't got much more detail on really at all.
Well, we are expecting some of that information to be forthcoming in the coming days. Hugh, on the livestock side, let's look at that, this much needed flexibility in terms of grazing and environmental schemes.
Yeah, absolutely, which is what we've sort of been talking about for the last God knows how many months, isn't it? Basically saying that for some of the cover crops, like the legume cover crops, for example, in some of the arable SFI options, there are they come in various guises, but you're not allowed, under normal conditions, you're not allowed to graze them or cut them. They're there to grow. Some of them allow you to mulch them or whatever. But what this basically says is that you will be allowed to graze them or cut them. Now, some cynics in the room might say, well, actually, if you'd done this 2 months ago, we could have actually got a vaguely okay crop of silage off them, whereas most of them will probably be burned to sticks, where they'll be like standing hay. But look, it's still dry matter, and something is better than nothing, so let's not sound really appreciative. But it comes back to what we were saying, well, what I've said before, going forward, if we're going to have these sort of impacts, we need a better system of triggering when you can use those. Either make the rule that you can use them for grazing or silaging. The problem is some people might take the Michael and just make a total mess out of it, because the condition here is you can cut them and graze them as long as you don't damage the soil. And ultimately, these measures are about putting roots back into soil and root mass back into soil. So it is possible to do both, but you do wonder going forward, so we're not left with this last minute thing constantly, is whether we need a more targeted system, which basically says if the rainfall goes below X or the soil moisture deficit goes below whatever, some sort of KPI, which automatically lets you get on and potentially utilize these when they're still a bit green and they've got a bit of something in them. If you silage them or graze them, you'd actually get some benefit from. Whilst every little will help many people who are in a really desperate situation at the moment with dry matter and forage, like I say, a lot of these cover crops. Sometimes red clover, we've had red clover, does amazingly well in a drought. But a lot of them will also be burnt off to sticks. So it will be like standing hay. But like I say, it's better than nothing.
And Louise, as well as extra funding and flexibility, recognition from Defra that these environmental schemes are a long-term commitment. That's something in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I was really encouraged to see in this press release, which, to be fair, we've only received recently. I'm really encouraged to see them say environmental agreements are long-term commitments, because I don't think we've really heard them say that before. And we all know what's happened with the sort of start, stop, chop and change situation that we've had ever since the SFI came along, certainly. Of course, what we really need is a scheme which is available to all farms. So if they're really going to be able to build in these resilience measures, we need a scheme with enough funding for everybody to be able to enter it. Now, we're actually quite a long way from that, but they are recognising the long-term nature of some of these things, and they have put some more money into the SFI. So we have to be pleased about that. And we have to hope that it brings those farmers out there that need it some of the relief that they're after.
And that's the point, isn't it, Hugh? Not to be ungrateful, but this is the start, or should be seen as a start. This is not 65 million, job done.
No, look, it's no silver bullet, that's for sure. And the reality is, look, the good thing in here is that, say, the derogation on grazing or utilising cover crops, which are in an SFI scheme or stewardship scheme, historic or otherwise, that you couldn't use. The good news is that in theory, you can do that now. So that's great. That is a bit of instant relief if there's still something left there to graze or to cut. So that's great. But yes, the rest of it, it's a start. It is not a silver bullet. There are some businesses in some real distress. We know that, given what's going on, whether it's around forage availability, whether it's around yield drop or whatever. But I think Louise's point about the longevity of these schemes, it's back to what we've been banging on like a load of boring old gits forever. It's about being able to plan your business, and it's about being able to say, this scheme is going to run. If I commit to this scheme, I can plan around that this scheme is going to be here for 10 years or however many years, and I can build that into my business plan, and I can bank on that. And on that, I can then start to build the rest of my business. Because at the moment, like I say, we've been budgeting for nothing. Anything that comes down the river is a bonus. And that really is not an option for many farm businesses.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
The Farmers Weekly Harvest Update, brought to you by KWS.
Welcome to our latest Farmers Weekly Harvest Update, and I'm joined by Matt Ball from KWS. Matt, mid-August, another year of extremes, no such thing as a normal season at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognise that, again, this season has been really challenging. And on farm, we're seeing reports of yields roughly back 10 to 15% from the long-term averages. I think within that, we've seen significant variation, particularly in the wheat side. So some of the earlier drill crops and those on soil types with slightly more body, which have held on slightly better, have yielded relatively well. But I think it's important to recognise that it's been a very challenging year across the board for winter cereals this season.
And what are we learning when it comes to crop varieties?
Yeah, I think different varieties perform better or worse in certain scenarios. I think that's the really important thing on farm, is that you're making sure that you're selecting varieties for the right situation on farm, be it first wheat, second wheats, or target drill dates as well. And I think what we're seeing this year is some varieties which are showing real yield potential and real consistency. And within the AHDB recommended list trials, the treated trials, we can see that where yellow rust has been really well managed, those varieties are performing exceptionally well. So the top of the tree is KWS Aintree at the moment, and that's closely followed by KWS Scope as well.
So you've got to make sure then that the varieties that you're growing are suitable for your own specific on-farm situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at targeting varieties for the right slots on farm. But I think the other thing that's really worth noting is that weather extremes are becoming more common. However, we don't know when those extremes are going to hit. So making sure that we're having a blend of varieties or a mix of varieties on farm to manage that risk and kind of spread that risk, I think is a really important thing for selecting varieties for the coming season.
Matt Ball from KWS, thank you very much. That's it for this week's Farmers Weekly Harvest Update with Matt Ball from KWS.
That's the Farmers Weekly Harvest Update, brought to you by KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, we've spoken about what Defra is doing about the drought, and now we're going to look at the situation on farm. We've lined up a couple of experts for you, one livestock, one arable. In a moment, we're going to look at the prospects for winter forage and ruminant livestock. But first, we're going to look at the prospects for drilling winter crops.
So I'm John Cousins, and I'm in the weed science team at ADAS. It's really important to just reflect on the autumn just gone. There was a lot of wheat in particular drilled a bit earlier, and I think, to my mind, we got away with that rather than there being any fundamental shift. The fundamental biology of the weed and the way that herbicides perform, it is still the case that we get a chit of the grass weed before we drill, so we're killing some before we're in the crop. We get lower germination in later drilled crops, and then the herbicide works better in later drilled crops. This year we didn't see all those factors come into play, because around that earlier drill period, we had good conditions for herbicides to work well, but we'd already had a chit of the weed. If you just think back, if we can, more than one season, a few years ago we were getting very dry autumns, and all those factors came into play. We weren't getting the chit, the herbicides performance was really poor at early drilled crops. And I just think we really want people to to, I think, play it by ear a little bit more. Have you got that flush of weeds so you know you've got less seeds that are going to come into the crop? Are the conditions really good to get a seed bed and get herbicides to work well? And almost make some decisions about, herbicide loadings, but also just fundamentally about when can you get away with drilling crops a little bit more on the fly rather than maybe having an overarching strategy.
Just on herbicide choices, John, you talked to the growers today about balancing the two risks, crop safety and efficacy.
Yeah.
And one of the suggestions that you had to the people here was have the chemicals in store to give yourself flexibility. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
What we talked about is if you apply your herbicides early, including simmethlin and maybe with other like pendimethlin, and you, in some conditions, you run the risk of not having enough crop selectivity and start to impact on the crop. If you apply your simmethlin-based herbicide, which is the strongest active we've now got against a lot of grass weeds, later, you run the risk of not having enough weed control. And you have to balance those two risks field by field, season by season. You can mitigate the risk a lot by making sure you've got the right seed depth in your crop and you've got the right consolidated seed bed, and think about what the forecast is in the short term when you're applying your herbicides. But what I think we're probably going to have around, because the backdrop is we are using quite a lot of soil acting chemistry to substitute for contacts in the crop that were almost one hit total control in some places when they're launched. I mean, you're having to use a lot more chemistry in combination and making sure that that's safe on the crop and not undermining that competitiveness that we were talking about in terms of the role the crop plays in suppressing surviving weeds, making the seed return smaller, is really, really important. And if you're going to balance that risk field by field, I do think that having a combination of herbicides where you can make a decision on the fly in terms of maybe if you think your risk of selectivity is high, apply a pre-M which is going to be inherently safer and come back with your simmethlin and pendimethlin, prosulfocarb, whatever. If you think the conditions are fantastic to get weed control, you've got good consolidated seedbed, you've got coverage, there's no large rainfall event forecast after application, you can use your simmethlin and products or mixes, and then maybe come back with the chemistry. But if you lock yourself into one of those strategies, it's harder to respond to the conditions on the ground on the day.
So as always, the weather's really important. Keep that flexibility in the system where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think we live like we've learned everything we need to know from the last season. And historically, that has been a terrible idea. We know that we're going to have autumns where early drilled crops are just not viable from a weed control point of view, where you've got historic levels of grass weeds. And we shouldn't take the experience of this year, where I think we got away with it, as a kind of blueprint to go forward.
That's ADAS weed specialist John Cousins. Louise, the message very clearly, whether it's winter wheat, whether it's oilseed rape, whatever you are planning to plant, hold tight until there is moisture in the ground. Drill according to the conditions, not by calendar date.
That's absolutely the message. I mean, we have, as he points out, we've had an early harvest, and that is usually very helpful when it comes to weed control and grass weed control in particular, because it gives you time before the next crop goes in to deal with some of those weeds. So that's usually helpful. The other thing, of course, that is happening this year, as we've talked about a lot, the dry hot conditions that we've had, they affect blackgrass dormancy, and in fact they shorten that dormancy period. So the good news, if you like, is that when we do get some rain, all of that blackgrass should chip very quickly. We won't get one of these prolonged germination periods which make it quite hard to time your weed control. So when we get the rain, that should happen. However, against that, of course, we've got people who are going to be itching to start drilling their wheat. And what you don't really want to happen is to have the two, the wheat and the weeds, coming up together. So they've got to balance that out. And John was talking there about having various options, herbicide-wise, at your disposal so that you can meet the situation that you have in front of you, really, and deal with it. I think the other really relevant point for this year is that pre-emergence herbicides, they just don't work very well in dry conditions. You do need moisture in the seedbed to activate them. So that'll be on people's minds as well. John mentioned synmethylin in that audio, and actually that's the only one that does work. Well, it works better than the others in dry conditions. But again, you do need some moisture there. So the timing is going to be interesting this year. People are going to want, we're going to get to the middle of September and they are going to want to be getting their wheat in. They would like to have dealt with the blackgrass before that happens, but it's all in the hands of the weather gods, really. As they point out, the soils are going to be warm still, so that should help with germination and things. But it's a different year to last year, and a question of just getting that timing and that sequencing right, I think.
That's winter wheat then, but before that, there will be growers out there right now looking to drill oilseed rape, some of them considering dry seeding. In other words, putting the seed into a dry seed bed so it's in the right place at the right time as soon as the moisture does arrive. A risky strategy, though.
Oh, yeah. When we're talking oilseed rape, we're often talking risk, aren't we? So, yeah, I mean, in a normal year, whatever that is, people would be drilling oilseed rape already. And the sort of date that we used to see lots of these crops going in was the August bank holiday weekend. Now, obviously that isn't happening, or as you say, there are some people deciding to put some in and see what happens. But I think it's probably worth pointing out that we're not seeing any oilseed rape volunteers up yet, are we? So clearly there's not enough moisture for them to appear, so there won't be enough moisture for a new crop either, I would have said. So how long can you leave it? And that's a big question. You've got the seeds sitting in a bag on the farm, you're ready to go, but the conditions are absolutely essential, and it's a crop that needs to get off to a very good start. I don't know if you remember, Johan, but earlier on in the year, we did an interview with the Kent grower Richard Budd, and he had won the Yen Oilseed Rape Award with the highest yield. And forgive me, Richard, but I just can't quite remember what that was now. But he made the point that compared to 10 years ago, he is now drilling oilseed rape much later than he used to. So he was talking about drilling it up until September the 20th. And the reason for that, I mean, he's down in Kent, it is warmer down there, but he was saying that oilseed rape down there is actively growing all year. So to have a bit of a delay doesn't worry him at all. And actually, when you look at the yields he's getting, you have to say he's not doing much wrong. So, yeah, we have got some time yet, but it is going to become more and more urgent if we don't get any decent rainfall. As I say, it's a crop that just won't establish without some moisture in the seedbed.
Thank you, Louise. Well, that's the situation then for autumn drilling. The situation already urgent for livestock, ruminant livestock, grazed livestock, as our second expert explains.
My name's Andrew Jones. I'm an independent dairy and beef nutritionist based in Shaftesbury in North Dorset. There's nothing around, no grass really at all. I mean, most of my clients a month ago, we were still talking about a couple of kilos of dry matter as a pick. When we're starting to look at rations now, we're just saying there's just nothing out there.
And what are you advising them?
Really, we've got to get on to winter rations. I mean, for example, the client I saw, as I say, in Devon earlier this week, they were just getting to the end, and I said to them, you need to open that silage pit now, because I've started to see some people that have held off too long, and those cows have lost condition because of it, and they're going to suffer moving forward because, that could protect fertility, is going to affect future production. It's going to take them a long time probably to bring some of that condition back on. So it's people are trying their best to not use those reserves that they've got, buying bales here, there and everywhere. But it's really, you've got to start getting into that forage, unfortunately.
And on the beef side, presumably the big fear, obviously there's issues around keeping condition, again, particularly on grazed cattle, and obviously buffer feeding is needed there. But presumably there's also a potential storm brewing with regards to fertility and conception rates, particularly in suckler cows outside.
Oh, definitely. As I say, this has. I've started to see cows, mainly dairy cows, but it'll be the same with beef, losing condition. If they lose condition, so it has that knock-on effect. It's going to affect your sucklers. And then the worst thing is if we suddenly get that grass growth, usually it will go late into the year, which means it is low dry matter and they won't get the volumes in. And again, it's not going to put those condition on the cows. People potentially, because they're short of forages, will keep those cows out, beef or dairy, longer than they would normally because there's reasonable grazing conditions. But is the grass quality going to be there? I'd still say they need to be looking at potentially buffering it, looking at it at the time and making that decision that it still might need to be buffered, because otherwise the quality is not going to be there. And I've seen autumns like it before, obviously not with a summer like this, where people kept the cows out, they lost condition and it affected their fertility. So it all knocks on. And if you don't get it right, I mean, I know I had a client that's now retired from dairying, and in 2018, some in-calf heifers, he says in retrospect, he wished he'd fed them a bit harder, full TMR, so he couldn't feed them anymore once they were milking. But even when he sold up and those animals were like fourth lactation at that point, that group still stood out as always being that sort of quarter of a point behind everything else on condition score. So really, it's something I've been thinking about this week. I think the message really make sure you keep condition on your cows. And I suppose I'd say that from experience when I farmed in Australia for 10 years and lived through the drought in 2007 in Victoria. We kept condition on the cows. I give it to my old man. He kept condition on the cows, spent the money. But once that drought broke, those cows milked and really milked. And it makes such a difference.
That's independent dairy and beef nutritionist Andrew Jones from Dorset on the need to keep condition on cattle. Hugh, not going to be easy though.
No, it's not. And as he said, keeping condition on is absolutely vital, but also on the dairy side, obviously, so you don't get huge drops in production. A lot of cows, beef suckler cows, will be out with bulls already. That's a challenge in itself, and people will be buffer feeding like mad to keep condition on. So hopefully, but it's never easy, especially with crazy spiky temperatures like we've had. It's not good for conception rates. And then on the sheep front, it's a catch-22 because people will have weaned lambs early to take pressure off ewes, but then that has an impact on the lambs. And as I say, you speak to a lot of the lamb buyers at the moment, they're saying, we're not blessed with a wash with perfectly finished lambs at the moment because the grass just isn't there. There's a lot of very average store lambs out there. The values aren't too horrendous, so it's chunking along. But nevertheless, getting that condition back on those ewes, if you're thinking about going tupping in the near future, that's really hard work. And it's really hard work to do with sheep when you're buffer feeding them. If you're feeding them forage or TMR or bale grazing or whatever you're doing, feeding bales, it's hard work. So I think going back to the announcements that if there is some cover crops that can be grazed near to you that haven't been grazed, that a neighbour might have, some will be burnt off sticks, but there's a bit of hope there that if you've got some good old resilient red clover, it's still got a bit of green in it, then that'll be better than feeding some dry old hay or tapping into your ever vital winter feed stocks, which loads of people have already ripped into those already. I mean, some of those are in absolute, chaos in terms of what they're doing going forward, and people looking at other options, whether it's ammoniaing straw or there's a whole myriad of other sort of plan Bs that people are obviously doing. Lots of challenges there. That doesn't come easy. And of course, if the rain does appear, and fingers crossed, I've been doing my naked rain dance, on the sheep front, you've got to be absolutely on it for things like homuncus, barber's poleworm. The blooming thing jumps out the ground. in a flash when it starts raining, and before you know it, it's burrowed through the intestinal tract of all your sheep, and you've got sick-looking sheep, one's hemorrhaging and all sorts. It's a real mess. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt. So you need to be absolutely on it in terms of wormers, ready to jump should that homunculus or similar suddenly jump onto your flock, because it'll be poised in the ground. And as soon as the moisture comes, then all the eggs hatch and they go mad. So there's all of those wonderful challenges as well, and fluke and everything else, which suddenly spike if we do get some rain. But hey, at least our friends at Defra and the government has sort of started to wake up to the immense challenges that we are facing, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And there's a heck of a lot of work to be done.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, as always, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. Now, some feedback this week from regular podcast listener Ian McDonnell in Yorkshire, who heard the item we did with leadership coach Sammy Seaman last week on the need to be resilient when it comes to challenges in agriculture. Ian says it's the same as football management. We call it automatic negative thoughts, or ANT, when a player blames the pitch, the referee, or the weather instead of looking at what they can control and their own play. It clouds their decision-making process and compounds the situation and ultimately their performance. As farming and as farmers and as a farming industry, says Ian, we need to be more psychologically resilient. And that resilient attitude is just the attitude demonstrated by farmers in South Wales this week, hit by wildfires, helping out the emergency services, helping out the firefighters, and Farmers Weekly's Undone went along to meet one of them.
Brian Bowen, how long has this fire been going here?
When was it? Was it Wednesday? This one started. It started at the back of the meat plant. Don't know the source of how it started, but it didn't seem to be that bad, but it's extended now considerably due to continued heat. And wind changes also make a big difference. If the wind turns at the moment, it's going sort of more southeast-south. But if it turned north again, it would take it. There's miles of burnable stuff due to the dry conditions.
So, I mean, the dry weather has obviously not helped this, but what else is contributing to these fires? They just seem to be escalating.
Well, I think some things that don't help is that some of the environmental schemes are not allowing stocking levels sufficient enough to keep the conditions down low enough. The grass areas where they've been grazed, grazed heavily, the fires have been able to sort of put them out. But in a lot of the areas, there's very little livestock, and there's such a build-up now of burnable stuff that it's uncontrollable, really. You know, I mean, the fire service, and we've got water bowsers now going round. We've got farmers and contractors put in thousands of litres of water with agricultural bowsers. That is making a big difference, but they're fighting an uphill battle because it's to such a big size now. Environmentally, they haven't wanted us to do anything, but I think we need to have what I'd call some form of fire break. But I think we need to address the grazing patterns and issues. When the season is suitable, we need to be grazing heavier than what we are.
That's South Wales farmer Brian Bowen talking to Farmers Weekly's Undone. Brian, they're calling for a rethink of environmental schemes in Wales and permission for farmers to reduce the risk of wildfires by grazing common land harder when conditions allow. Now, time for this week's market prices in just a moment. But Louise, some turmoil in the Black Sea this week. Bombing of Russian grain terminals by Ukraine causing a price spike.
Yeah, that's all been happening this week. So we have seen a bit of a bounce in wheat prices. I think wheat futures for November 26th have firmed up to about £200 a tonne. So that's about 20 quid up from a month ago. And of course, the other thing that has a bearing on that is that we have had a pretty poor harvest, and not just here in the UK. Wheat yields are expected to be below the 5-year average for quite a few countries, actually. So that's also having an influence on wheat prices. So that's just something to keep an eye on, really.
Thank you very much, Louise. And Hugh, those market prices, what are they doing?
Thank you very much, Johan. Finished their deadweight continues to rise, 609.7. So that's gained you about 1.2 pence on the week. The live weight for average steer price 341.5. That's gone back about 5p on the week. Sheep prices just edging back as well. SQQ deadweight 723.5, back from 781.4 last week. So some volume starting to come through there. Also on the live weight, that's 330.4. That's actually gained 10p on the week. But trying to find those well-finished lambs with virtually no grass anywhere is, I think, blooming hard work for lots of buyers at the moment. Pig price, that is starting to firm. There's some good news there. 180.4. That's about the second or third week. It's just edged up. And actually, that's jumped up nearly 2p on the week. So that's some good. Actually, no, 2.1p it's gone up on the week. So that's some good news for the pig sector at the moment. On to arable prices. Now, these are obviously worked out and crunched before the Black Sea bombing happened. So add on the numbers that Louise said to these prices, and you'll probably get a more accurate spot price for the now, as it were. So the feed wheat before the bombing, unfortunately, had actually dropped back about 3 quid a tonne, 184.80. Milling wheat had actually gained 2 quid or £2.70, 200 dead, or 270. £200.70 is the spot on milling wheat this week. Feed barley 165.20. That stands on. That hasn't moved at all. Oilseed rapes gained nearly. We're getting on for sort of 15 quid, 439.40 oilseed rates. So some good gains there. Feed peas gains 3 quid, £3.80, 203. 0.8. Feed beans 220.4. That's actually got gained a couple of quid as well. And then again, probably because of all the shenanigans going on in Iran still and the uncertainties around Hormuz, 97.72 is your Wednesday morning red diesel ring round average price. So that's actually gained. Unfortunately, it's gone up about 4p on the week.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, 3 old men with a combined age of 245 are paddling 500 miles this summer to support a mental health helpline for farmers. Norfolk farmer Henry Kilvert, John Rampling and Rod Hunt are raising funds for Yana, the You Are Not Alone charity in East Anglia. I picked up a paddle and decided to join the self-styled 3 old men in boats on the river near Thetford. So we're here on the Little Ouse River near Thetford, and I'm with Henry Kilvert, one of the 3 old men in boats. Henry,
and we're proud to do what we do at our age.
You are the baby of the group, though.
Well, of course I am. I'm a mere 72. My colleagues are 86 and 87, and it's lovely to be the youth policy of something when you're at this age.
And how did this idea come about?
Well, the other 2, John and Rod. John and Rod are very keen Rotarians. They approached Yana about doing a kayaking challenger. And as at the time I was the chair of Yana and a keen kayaker, I joined them. And this is our 3rd season.
And you've been on many different rivers. This is the river Little Ouse. What's the plan this season?
I think first plan is to try and survive, but it's to do as many rivers and to get as many people involved in the kayaking as we can. So we're now saying, right, come on, please everybody help us, come out, paddle for Jana, and you will do good, and we will be very happy.
You are putting the fun into fundraising, but there is a serious point to this. This is a little bit more than just messing around in boats.
It is a great way to get across the 4 counties, to transverse them, to meet people on the way, to explain why we're doing it, to meet members of the public, because farming is in a very difficult situation at the moment. These very hot temperatures, the very dry soil has made everything very difficult. And all the other inherent things of being on your own, because loneliness in agriculture is a starting problem for so many things. That's why we're called Jana. You are not alone. You're not alone with Jana there with our helpline. So please contact us, because we want to help you if you need some help.
And you do have a live helpline?
Yes, we started that a couple of years ago, and so we're live from 10 in the morning till 2. So if you want to speak to someone, please ring 0300 323 0400 weekdays, and there'll be some very kind and gentle person will speak to you. And outside those hours, you can always leave a message. But the long and the short of it is that we provide free counselling for people who we think would benefit from it. So you might have to wait a year or more with the NHS. With Jana, we'll try and get it to you next week.
Henry Kilvert, thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. My pleasure.
That's Norfolk farmer Henry Kilvert, one of 3 old men in boats, raising money for Jana. And that Jana helpline, again, 0300 323 0400. And if you want to get involved or make a donation to Jana, we'll put a link to Jana in the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. Louise.
So, Johan, you've been messing about on the river this week.
Well, do you know, Louise, I didn't set out to start messing about in boats, but or on boats or on the river, but Henry got in touch, and I thought, well, you know, I'll go along, and it's always better to record audio in person rather than down the line if we can. We don't always get the opportunity, and Henry's not a million miles from me, so I decided to meet up, and when I got there, he not only had one kayak for himself, he had brought a kayak for me too. So I had no choice really, but no, in for a penny, in for a pound. And I was literally able to dip my toe in the water, and we got out on the river and we recorded the interview like that. So it was all good fun, but there is a serious point to all of this. As he was saying, you know, we know the trials and tribulations facing farming at the moment, and putting the fun back into fundraising, but also raising money for Jana, a very, very important charity doing very, very good work across the sort of the 4 counties of eastern England there, Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex and Cambridgeshire.
Well, you certainly picked the right week for it.
Yeah, it was lovely to get out on the water, a little bit cooler than on dry land, not by much though, but this is the 3rd year that Henry, John and Rod have been doing this. They've raised well over £20,000 for Jana, so as paddling pensioners, they'll be raising even more money this summer. And that is it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johan Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Happy paddling, and thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast was brought to you by plant breeder KWS, seeding the future since 1856.